Okay, let's get more on that situation. I'm joined by Save Our SABC Coalition's Dudu Etsang Makuse. Dudu, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, let's talk about the what we now know coming out of Parliament today. So the SABC is factually broke, as the CEO is saying. What are your thoughts as Save Our SABC on that fact?
I think for us, the situation is pretty much what we anticipated was going to happen a few months ago, because we've been saying that government guarantee should have been put in place months ago already, even before the resignations from the board. So to hear the CEO confirming today what he had already projected was going to happen a few months ago, 6 months ago to be exact, is no surprise to us. But we are still hopeful that the relevant authorities are going to do what needs to be done.
Okay, so the Ministry of Communications is promising a bailout. Is a bailout what the SABC requires, though? Another bailout?
This is where it starts getting confusing. I think the public are fatigued with the word bailout, and
yes.
They're not really asking for a bailout. They're asking for a government guarantee. Essentially, they're asking for the government to write a letter that says to banks that if the SABC borrows money, that if they default on said borrowed money, that government would step in. So it's not that they're saying to government, give us money right now from the fiscus to keep things running. They're simply saying, be our credit, be the backstop for when we get the loan from a bank so that we can continue operations. In other words, they intend to pay back that money to said banks, not to government.
Mm-hmm. So, Dudu, Save Our SABC represents the workers, correct? Or
we represent various bodies. We represent some unions. We represent the independent sector, some organizations in that sector, individuals, academics, and activists.
The people that you represent, the organizations, obviously are fully aware that you can't keep borrowing money as any type of entity. At some point, the SABC has to start operating in the black. And they came out last year and said one of the ways to get there is maybe to shed some of the jobs that are there at the SABC, and you said no to that.
See, the problem with retrenchments in the typical corporate fashion that it would be conducted is that it doesn't really deal with what was the problem. Remember, if you go back to 2016, around that time, we identified specific things that were wrong with the SABC. Some of the things that we identified was a bloat at the middle level. We identified that there had been improper and irregular hiring of personnel. We identified that people were on freelance contracts that were essentially behaving or being made to work like permanent workers, right? So what we said was, look, we understand that you have too many people that are potentially replicating jobs. Why don't you take stock of what it is that you have? Why don't you come up with objective facts about who's doing what, who's qualified for what, who needs to be where? And on the basis of that, you make decisions. Because if you just come out and say retrenchments, you're essentially going to put everyone in a very anxious position where you end up not even getting the productivity levels that you need.
Yep. So if they do that, you will okay retrenchments. Is that what you're saying?
If
they come back and say, we've seen this is a problem, that we don't need this particular department, because there's over 1,000 middle managers at the SABC. That's incredible.
It's unsustainable. It is unsustainable, and it's one of those difficult decisions and difficult discussions that we're going to have. Are we saying retrenchments? I don't think we'll eventually say retrenchments. I think you'll say restructure, remove people to some places, change job descriptions, see how you can reutilize what you already have first. And if we're thoroughly convinced that you have done that, then if that is really the last thing to do, we would probably have no choice but to step behind it, because at the end we want a public broadcaster that will live past this year and past this crisis.
Okay, you do want that, but let's just go back to those and give you some figures where the projected cost base for the financial year ending 2018 for the SABC, 7.2 billion rand. That's fine. But of that, employees' costs are at a whopping 42% of that. That's not sustainable.
Not at all.
Any kind of business.
It's never been a sustainable figure.
Yeah.
And it specifically speaks to the bloat that happened in those infamous cloudy years where, there was just rampant increase of staff against the advice of, outsiders and even HR departments within the SABC. And I think this is part of the painful process that has to happen in reversing some of those decisions and in getting the SABC back to a position where it can function in a sustainable manner.
First, we need a board.
First, we need a board. First, we need a board, and there has been delays on that. If it wasn't for a legal letter that we had to send to Parliament compelling them to get the process underway, I'm not sure that we'd even seen interviews last week.
But then you can have a board. We've had boards in the past. Don't you want to start having people, the relevant people with the relevant knowledge of this particular industry? You've even had unions coming out and saying we need maybe some labor representation in that board. What's your say? I can see you rolling your eyes when labor representation on the board. Why?
I understand why the labor unions came in and said they want specific labor people on the board. But the problem with that is it basically shifts the entire model as we have it into one where we would have to have public representative systems on there. So then women's groups, disabled people, and all other marginalized groups can come and say, well, we also want a representative on the SABC. The current system as it stands allows for everyone to put forward their representatives. There was nothing stopping labor unions from putting forward their people in the nominations process. I'm pretty sure they know a lot of people, so we don't know how it happened that their candidates didn't get to shortlisting, but I think this current process is as fair as it's going to get, because the alternative that they're pushing for, which is what other countries are doing in Europe, would essentially have us having to legitimize who a legitimate women's representative, who a legitimate labor representative is first, before we appoint that said person to the board.
Okay, Dudu Etsang, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Dudu Etsang from the Save Our SABC coalition, speaking about